Starting off with, we'll look at U.S. soybean acreage, just to give you a feel how this year compares to others. This is actually the least amount of soybeans we've planted going back to 2007. As we look at the production as a result, you can see that this will be the least amount of soybeans that we'll plant or will harvest it. I anticipated going back to 09. I'm just going to highlight a few of the important items on there. The first one is planted acreage. USDA is projecting 75 million acres planted. That's down about 2.4 million acres from last year. In addition, on the harvested acreage side, which would be the second line, that's at 73.8 million acres. That's down about 2.8 million acres from last year. There's a lot of discussion out there right now that those two numbers will probably come down more yet because of the flooding problems we've seen out in the Mississippi River, the flooding on the Missouri River, some of the planting problems that we saw from the Dakotas and also in the Eastern Corn Belt will probably bring those two numbers down lower. As we move on to yield, currently USDA is forecasting 41.4 bushels per acre. That was down 2 bushels the acre from last report. Now there's a lot of discussion on that one. You know, as we look around with the weather we're having, they might have been a little bit ahead of themselves there. We could potentially come in with a little bit better yield than that at this time. But for now, that's the number that they've thrown out. Now, as we switch over to the demand side, I want to point out one big change that they made on the exports. Last year, they said that we exported 1.495 billion bushels. This year, they actually said that we're just going to export about 1.4 billion. That's a 95 million bushel decrease in exports. Guys, as we survey it out there and look at what we see, we don't see that kind of reduction. As a matter of fact, what USDA ended up having to do, because of the planted acreage and because of the yield that they used, they had to adjust the demand so that they would be able to show that we're still going to have enough soybeans left at the end of next year. The current ending stock number, which is the next number we'll move on to, is at 155 million bushels. 155 million bushels isn't many bushels, guys. And what that number is that would be how many beans they forecast us to have left over at the end of August in 2012. It's about 15-day supply. So when we get out to the end of 2012 in August, we'd have about 15 days. So even if they would go ahead and raise yields later on, I believe that they'll have to bring our demand number up on the exports higher. And as a result, that gives us a pretty firm footing underneath the soybean market.
How do you put together what is essentially a farm income safety net? How big of a net, what protection level, how do you get a net together that really gives you the peace of mind in your operation? And if we talked about the farm income safety net, we would traditionally start with commodity programs, Title I of the Farm Bill, the basic federal farm income safety net programs. And we would also traditionally talk about price-based safety net tools, as if risk was only concentrated on the price component. That price-based safety net was a tradition of farm programs dating back to the 1930s. The initial farm programs were focused on propping up farm incomes by propping up market prices. So it was a price-based environment. As we've moved through the generations of farm programs, we currently have a 3-part safety net in the farm program that is still tied to price. It's an income support program more than a price support program, but it's based on prices. A marketing loan, a counter-cyclical payment, and a direct payment. But the marketing loan is at $2 a bushel. The counter-cyclical payment, $5.56, is the trigger price. If prices drop below that level, we'll start seeing some support. How many think those price support levels are relevant? How many hope that they're irrelevant? You know, we don't want to see $5 and $6 soybeans again and trigger these kinds of safety net tools, because there'd be an awful lot of pain a long time before we got to a point where these things mattered. By the 08 Farm Bill debate, we were questioning whether that price safety net was still relevant. We had bumped up to, you know, beans in the teens. We had fallen back in the $8, $9, $10 range. We had ended up with about a $10 average price on soybeans in 7 and 8. And that 5 and 5.56 trigger didn't really make much sense even as early as 7 and 8. And so the focus was on, is there a different kind of safety net? Should we focus on something other than price? That left people talking about an alternative, and that alternative was something called ACRE, Average Crop Revenue Election. Acre was the program that we did some education on during these field days back in 2008 and 2009. And I'm happy to report that that education was so successful that all of 25% of you signed up for the Acre program. 25% doesn't sound like a very big, a very big sign-up number. 75% chose to keep that old direct and counter-cyclical program going. 25% of Nebraskans signed up. Well, guess what? In fact, 25% of Nebraska was the largest percentage sign-up of any of the major commodity states. So in fact, we were amongst the leaders. But even here, we saw pretty hesitant reaction to how that Acre program worked. Well, that Acre safety net in 2009, the first year that it was offered, was tied to a 5-year average yield, which would have been 2004 through 2008. And it was multiplied times the 2-year average price, which would have been 7 and 8. And then it was multiplied by 90%. So average yield, average price times 90%. That was your guarantee for Acre at the state level. That guarantee moves. 5-year average yields have gradually climbed over time. One expects them to continue. A 2-year average price, well, we've had this price fluctuation. This 2-year average lags it a bit, but it follows price movements to the point that that safety net actually stays relevant to today's revenue expectations. And the other tools start first and foremost with crop insurance. These are the crop insurance policies at the farm level that present sort of the basic portfolio in 2011. These are the same game by a different name. 2011, they rewrote the crop insurance provisions. They changed the names of the policies. Yield protection that you bought this year, that's the traditional APH plan that only protects yield losses. We have an established rate that happens to be $13.49, which was the new crop soybean futures price average in February. You have an APH on your farm, a proven yield. You protect some percent of that proven yield, and you have losses if yield falls below that guarantee. Losses are paid out at the established rate of $13.49. Revenue protection is the new name in 2011 for what had been crop revenue coverage or revenue assurance with the harvest price option. It's the basic revenue plan. Does revenue beat yield protection? Well, it's basically adding yield protection plus that price component. Same spring guarantee, $13.49 is the price, times whatever your APH is, times whatever guarantee level you purchase. That's your spring guarantee. But let's recalculate it in the fall. Whatever the fall price is, times the APH, times the guarantee level, that's your fall guarantee. Let's take the higher of those two. So if prices go up, the guarantee actually increases. If prices go down, the guarantee will stay set where it was at. But we'll guarantee your revenue against that higher the spring or fall price. That gives me the revenue protection to know that if I have widespread production, or if I have production losses on the farm, yield losses, or if I have price losses, if I have revenue loss from either yield or price, I'll see the revenue protection program kick in and help out. Well, there is a third tool up there. It is not commonly used in Nebraska, not very widely used across the country, but revenue protection without the harvest price, that's just that spring price guarantee, and actual fall revenue counts against that guarantee. It doesn't have that extra fall price protection. It's a cheaper policy, but it also doesn't protect you from that particular scenario. We should add one more element to that safety net, and that is the disaster assistance programs. The crop disaster program, there's the crop revenue or supplemental revenue assistance program, the SURE program. Established in the 08 Farm Bill, it was part of a push for a permanent authority to deliver disaster assistance. Instead of this almost eternal debate about should I buy crop insurance or should I wait for a disaster to occur and then watch Congress debate whether we should have assistance or not, and then see a disaster package that comes out to cover losses. Should I worry about disaster assistance or crop insurance? Do they substitute for each other? Well, the rewrite in 2008 said we're going to authorize disaster assistance, and we're going to link it directly to crop insurance, such that if you buy crop insurance, you're eligible for disaster assistance. If you don't, you're not. Sort of an all-in or all-out sort of game. Well, the supplemental revenue coverage requires you to buy crop insurance. Soybeans, corn, all the crops on the farm, all the major crops. Buy your crop insurance, you've established some protection level that gives you a total crop revenue protection on the farm. The SURE program effectively protects another 10% or so of your revenue. And so it adds to the crop insurance coverage you buy. If you don't buy any, your coverage is zero, and an extra 10% of zero is still going to be zero. Well, that's the Supplemental Revenue Assistance Program, the disaster assistance. Add disaster assistance to the crop insurance leakage. Also note that disaster assistance requires a disaster declaration. And here's where we look at Nebraska in 2011. Where do we have disaster declarations? It's the flooding. It's the Missouri River corridor. It's the North Platte out in Lincoln County, where we had flooding that translated into agricultural losses. We had an application and approval of disaster declaration for ag losses.
Now we want to focus on what can you do in your particular marketing plan that's probably different than what you're doing today to add dollars to your bottom line. From this point forward, guys, I want you to always think of, when you see the cash price, don't think of it as just the cash price. If there's anything you walk away from my side of it, let that be it. I know it's very easy to focus on that, but let me unpack what I mean. You need to include basis management into your marketing. And let's talk about basis management. Well, in order to do that, we really need to look at what makes up your cash price. Your cash price is made up of two components. It's made up of a futures price, and it's made up of a basis. Those two things come together. Now, how do they come together? Well, cash minus your futures price will give you a basis number, okay? More important part of the whole thing is that, what is that basis telling us? It's telling us a story. That story is what is the supply and demand in your local area. If your demand is very tight relative to your supply, you could actually have positive basis numbers. Numbers in which they are paying you more than what the Chicago Board of Trade is for your grain. If you've got plenty of supply and the demand isn't real good, then you'll have negative numbers. And if there's enough of that supply out there, they'll even get more negative or wider. First of all, it starts with selecting the right type of contract. What you're wanting to do is you're wanting to just get the futures price set. So how can you do that? Two ways. One, if you're going to your elevator, you can go ahead and do a hedge to arrive contract, or now, because of the things we saw that happened back in the 90s, sometimes they've renamed these contracts. But the whole idea when you go in there and talk to them about it is that you want a contract where you just set the futures price. Or you can go ahead and sell futures on the Chicago Board of Trade. Next, what you need to do is record the basis levels of the different grain buyers for all the different delivery periods. And this is where most people kind of pull up short. They say, yeah, I keep track of what the prices are, but I don't necessarily keep track of the basis. Or I keep track of the basis, but it's only for one particular delivery period. In order to be able to go ahead and get the most benefit out of this, you really need to be tracking the basis levels for any particular delivery period that you may deliver bushels to, whether that be for beans or also for corn. Then the next step would be is it's best if you go ahead and chart it. Much like when you look at the futures data, it's always easier to look at it in a chart. If you're looking at your basis data, it's also easier to look at in a chart either. Also. Now, why do you want to look at it in a chart? By looking at a chart, you're going to be able to start seeing some patterns. Just like there's patterns in the technicals, there's also patterns in the basis. What these patterns are going to tell you is they're going to give you a feel of, does this year compare to some other years in the past when we had similar amounts of supply and demand in our area. The other thing it tells you a lot about is your grain buyer. Each of your grain buyers that you go into, depending on similar conditions, have a certain way in which they bid.